grip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we women and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.
Welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Good evening to most of you. Good night to some of you. Good afternoon to some of you. Wherever you are in the world, welcome to Politics 101. It's our Thursday night edition. And of course, the big news continues to be the teacher strike. The teacher strike, which is in its second week. We're almost the end of the second week, and there hasn't been any shift yet. I was on a program in the Caribbean, I think yesterday morning, and they were asking me who I think will blink first. It was quite a difficult question to answer. But certainly if one looks at the response of the teachers to the strike, it is evident that the teachers are in this for what we may call, well, not long haul, but certainly medium term. I think the government is not helping the situation. In fact, it's helping to mobilize the teachers. We're going to be talking about some of that this evening. My guest, of course, is Professor Clive Thomas and Professor Dennis Canterbury, both members, long-standing members of the WPA, but professionals in their own right. Professor Thomas, as you know, is well known in Guyana and outside of Guyana and for the field as an authority when it comes to developmental economics. And Dr. Canterbury has been a professor for quite a while and has written on some of these subjects. Good evening. Welcome to Politics 101. A very special good evening to the teachers. It's the focus is on the teachers, and quite rightly so, because the teachers are leading the way. You know, I continue to say that there are lots of lessons that we can learn from these actions. And I think one of the big lessons, and this is a lesson for those of us who are supporters of the opposition, who are not necessarily supporters of the government, if sometimes we try to script the struggle, we try to tell workers this is what they should do, and you know, we all get angry and antsy. Why are Guyanese people taking this, and the resistance should be this and that and so on, you know? And you know, we've taken the position that resistance is a continuous thing. You know, there are instances of overt resistance, as we are seeing now on the streets. But there are also instances of covert resistance. You know, people carrying out their day-to-day tasks, but doing it in such a way that they hold their integrity and they survive. They survive the onslaught, and that in itself, survival is in itself a form of resistance and protest. And sometimes I know, we political activists and some political leaders, we make that mistake sometimes, in that we think we can order the struggle, we can script the struggle. And as I have said, if you were to have asked us 3 weeks ago, would 85% of workers, 85% of teachers be on strike? Most of us would have said no. Although that's what we want, we would have said no. Because, you know, we can't script the struggle. consciousness is very important. And I think as political people, we have to continue to work on that front. Sometimes that's the only front we have at our disposal. There was a time when we had options, in struggle. Many people go back to the 1960s and 70s, the period of mass upheaval. 1970s, the decade of revolution, political activists going into the hills and all that kind of forms of protest, forms of resistance, forms of action. And there was some dividends that we got from those kinds of actions, but time moves on and circumstances change. And as political people, we have to work with what we have. We have to work with what we have. And we in the Working People's Alliance are very clear about that. We are very, very clear about that. Many people try to tell us we should go back and do what we did in the 70s and the 80s and so on. We read the situation right then, we think, and we did what was appropriate and what was necessary. We made errors of judgment, of course, but there were times when we got it right. But we are far gone from the circumstances of the 1970s and 1960s and 1980s. Now, principles remain the same. We have dubbed the struggle of the teachers as a struggle for bread and justice. It's a term that was coined by Professor Clive Thomas in the 1970s. I grew up on that slogan for bread and justice. That this whole thing about the political strike and all of that, I mean, it's a strike for bread and butter is also a strike for justice. And so the principles that we fought for back then, some of those principles are still with us and we fight for those principles. But the circumstances are different. And we have new generations of Guyanese who are growing up and coming of age in different circumstances. And we can't expect them to go back and reconstitute the 1970s in their minds and so on. We have to work with them where they are. And we have to contribute to that socialization. We have to contribute to the consciousness. I keep saying over and over again that it's a mistake that some of us made to have given the impression 2 or 3 years ago that Guyana wasn't going to get any money. The contract was so terrible and Exxon was carrying away everything. It is not that the intention of that critique is bad. No, Exxon is indeed carrying away a lot. But we are also, comparatively speaking, with what we got before, we're also getting a lot. And the government used that propaganda because, of course, the government is saying that we are responsible for the development and the GDP, the rise in the GDP and the growth rate and so on. And we in the WP have been saying, no, it's the windfall from the oil and gas. And a lot has gone into play with that. It is the volume of the oil reserves, as Professor Thomas would argue. It is the quality of the oil. It is at a particular time when the prices on the market are not as low as they were at some time. We had the war in Ukraine that gave us some resources that we weren't expecting. And so there are a lot of factors that go into it. But the fact of the matter is that we have more money now than ever. And the leaders are saying, and the teachers are saying it openly on the picket line. They're saying it openly on the picket line. There is money. And you don't want to say you told us, we told you so, but the fact of the matter is that some of us have been saying that. while some others have been saying, "Oh no, it's better the oil remain in the ground and all that story and so on." No, we are in sympathy with the environmentalists. We are in sympathy with the view that we have to be careful that the oil does not become a curse. We don't unsubscribe to those views, but we're arguing it can be either that or nothing. And we are glad that the teachers, and by extension the Guyanese population, have come to the realization that Guyana is not the same as it was before First Oil. We are a petro state now, and that comes with a lot of changes. That comes a lot of change. Some people say, well, the GDP, never mind that. Well, the GDP means something. The GDP means something. Ask the teachers, and they're going to tell you that rise in the GDP means something. It helps their argument for a living wage. We got that right. And we in the Working People's Alliance are glad that we were on the right side of that issue. We are on the right side of that issue. We got it right. The workers now have something else to make their case, And so we just wanted to highlight that as we continue to cover the teachers' strike. As we are saying, we in the WP are saying, the objective is not to strike. The objective is to have an improvement in wages and salary. The objective is to get the government, the employer, to sit down and to bargain with the workers. It is not that everything the workers ask for they will get. Not everything the government says they can offer, that will go through. That is why you have collective bargaining. That is why you have trade unions. And there's a resurgence of trade unionism in the world, in the big capitalist country, the United States, where we, you go back to the 1980s when they dismiss a lot of, I remember those people who were manning airplanes. The technical term for them escapes me now. Reagan did that, and the whole anti-union activity in America. So we go from Reagan 40 odd years ago, knocking off the people who conduct the air thing. You all know what I'm talking about. Knocking them off to 2023, where the US president goes into the picket line with workers and the unions in America winning benefits for their workers. And in that context of the resurgence of trade unions, we have to locate ourselves, because if there is a resurgence in trade unions, it means there's a resurgence of the issues that gave rise to trade unions in the first place. I tell my students all the time when we do the history of workers' struggle in the United States, is that the rise of the trade unions came with the Industrial Revolution in America. Prior to that, was slavery and, slave labor and so on. There was no need for trade unions then. But as they're making the transition from a slave society or an economy based on slave labor to an economy based on wage labor, we see the rise of trade unions. So trade unions didn't drop out of thin air. And of course, we have seen the ebb and flow. There are times when, the emphasis on trade unions decline. And some people have read the eulogy for trade unions. But today in Guyana, we are seeing the relevance of industrial action as a means of securing a living wage. And our government has exposed itself in the worst way. In the worst way. The people in the Caribbean are asking me because they have a difficulty understanding it. How can Guyana, which has so much money, and they're hearing the president going and giving out handouts, why is the government so resistant to giving teachers? And what we have to get into the sociology of race and politics to get them to understand that the government is acting in a political way. It's not for the government. This is not about wages and salary. It is their own political survival that is guiding their action. So there is a lot that is going into the strike here. Welcome to Politics 101. I love the fact that you all are here and ready to go. Our numbers since the start of the strike has really gone through the roof, as you would say. Our numbers have been great, and I'm so thankful to all of you for coming out and to hear what we have to say and to hear our perspective. There are a number of programs and there are a number of perspectives, and that is good. That is very good. That is what social media has helped to do, is that it has given us a diverse platform of where we get our views. And we here on Politics 101, we in the WPA, we bring to bear our own perspective. We don't always give it a partisan label, but you all know the story. You all know. There's a time when we do party campaigning, and there's a time when we deal with ideas. And those ideas arise from our own experience as professionals and as a party that is grounded in 50 years of history of our country. And so here we are. Anyhow, enough from me. Let's bring in our guests, Professor Clive Thomas and Professor Dennis Canterbury. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening, David.
Good evening.
And sorry for taking up some of your time.
No.
But I should give some context for our discussion tonight.
Yeah.
CY, is there anything there in my comments that, and the same thing for you, Dennis, anything in my comments that you would like to expand on as we begin our program tonight?
Well, first of all, let me congratulate you on what you said. You know, it's pretty comprehensive. Secondly, I would emphasize that one dimension of this issue has been the focus on the distribution of income, the sharing of the wealth. You spoke a lot about recognizing the accumulation of value and accretion of wealth that we're getting with the finding of the oil. But what is also coming into focus is that the distributional problems within the country, who gets what and the shares of whom and whom, are equally important. And that is at the heart of the strike of the teachers. Because they fight for a living wage, they're fighting for the advancement of their relative position in the society as a whole and the economy as a whole. You remember last time I made the observation that history seems to suggest that working class advances or support for change tends to grow more rapidly when the prospect for change rises rapidly. Has created a vision for people which has been confirmed by the budget, the last budget, where the government tried to be opportunistic and claim that it had $1 trillion budget, that there is indeed what we have been arguing, a large sum of money coming from the windfall oil, and that we have to fight over for our shares in it. So this, I think, is an added dimension to what you was intending to say, which was implicit to what you argued. But I would just want to tease that out a little bit more. That would be the only contribution I'd like to make.
Thank you very much, Professor Clive Thomas. And of course, the observation that you make there, it is very important, because we are not accumulating wealth for the sake of accumulating wealth. That wealth has to be part of the development, the improvement of the living conditions of our people, the material conditions
Yeah, of course.
of our people. Professor, as I said, I do a weekly program in the Caribbean, and one of the questions that was posed to me was whether I thought that Guyana should put together its own Petro-Caribbean, outreach to the rest of the Caribbean.
Yes,
Because
I advocated that to you before.
yes,
That's my position.
yes, and I was able to quote you and to put it in historical context that we don't see it any other way. We don't see it any other way.
And I will go forward and see, even for this specific matter that we're discussing now, the strike. I think one of the first things that the teachers needed to do, and which they can still do, is to regionalize it and embarrass the authorities that are there fighting to get a hearing from. I mean, I can remember when I was head of the University Union, we brought Prime Minister Basdio Pandey here before he died. So we sought every opportunity, Commission from Barbados, we sought every opportunity to regionalize the struggle, because we knew that the government was a poser government in terms of the rest of the region. So if you want to stand up and make them aware of what they're doing, I think the way to go is to regionalize a lot of the struggle. Don't allow them to go to the rest of the region and just boast about the money. Let them have to contend with the challenges to how they're treating their people. I've never heard a more abusive and a set of abrasive remarks made against unions than I've lived to see being made today against the GTU by officials in the government. It is absolutely appalling. I mean, they speak to them worse than children. It reminds me of the plantation, what it must have been. As if the people have no right to have an opinion to be different from you. And we got to sort of put a stop to that sort of abuse. It is not Guyanese, and we should not allow it to become normalized. The hectoring, patronizing, abusive, all the time, personal, vindictive remarks about people is part of the way in which they're dealing with the teachers' union. And degrading the struggle is really uncouth. And we can't allow it to continue either.
Thank you very much, Professor Clive Thomas, for that angle, the regionalization of the struggle. Coretta MacDonald, the General Secretary of the Union, was here a couple of nights ago, and she said that they have gotten a public statement from the Caribbean Union of Teachers, but they've also gotten statements of support from affiliates. The Belize Teachers Union, for one, has expressed support, and they are reaching out to their colleagues in the Caribbean. And I can tell you, as someone who is on that Caribbean circuit, it is a big issue. It is a big issue in the news, in the region at this time. But of course, more can be done and should be done in that regard. Let me bring in Dr. Dennis Canterbury. Dr. Canterbury, good evening to you. And in my introduction and Professor Thomas's response, is there anything there that you would like to expand on or to reiterate?
Yes, thank you, David, for your for the summary you gave, and CY for his intervention with respect to regionalization. I was thinking about 3 points that I thought about when you were giving your opening remarks, David. One is about the whole notion of oil not becoming a curse, and with respect to the environment. But I would like to add to that, not just the environment, but also not becoming a curse in terms of the sort of conflicts that we've seen can be generated from when we come look at other oil producing countries, as well as this whole question of having all of this money, but yet poverty continues to persist. The persistence of poverty and degradation in the midst of all of this money. And here the teachers, um, their call for and cry for a living wage is fits into this sort of idea, because you can have the money, but yet the curse could be the money isn't reaching down to the people at the bottom, and this gives more reason for implementing something like a universal basic income. Another thing I was thinking about as you were talking is this whole question of and CY touched on it to some extent as well, is this question of the pendulum swinging back towards workers, because we know what happened in the 70s. We know what happened with the arrival of in Guyana of the ERP, when people couldn't afford to pay to go to work, with the structural adjustment programs that were in place right across the region, and the position that unions had to take. Unions had to become more or less collaborators with structural adjustment. They call them stakeholders. But now we've noticing that that model has been on the decline, and that the unions are being freed again, even as you refer to here in the United States, to mobilize, organize, and to get people and to represent the workers' interests rather than represent the interests of capital. And the third thing I was thinking about as well is this notion of if the GDP is up, then why can't all Guyana be up? If you have such a big GDP, then we should be able to pay the teachers, and not only the teachers, but you're supposed to be able to pay the universal basic income. You're supposed to be able to pay all workers, government workers, at a better rate, because the GDP is up, the country must be up. GDP can't be up and the people are down, such that the teachers have to come out on the streets to strike, and more people might very well come out to strike because you have all this money. So what are you doing with this money? And when you listen to the political people talking on these issues, they're only giving, as CY was saying earlier, they're only insulting the workers, in this case, the teachers. They're making claims that would give you the impression that the teachers don't have any skills. I was surprised to hear the VP saying that, well, if you want to have more money, you should increase your skills. These are teachers, people who went to college, are trained teachers, and you're telling them the reason why their income is so low is because they don't have enough skills. I really don't understand that.
Yes. And good evening to you if you're just joining the program. And all three of us here are teachers. Professor Clive Thomas has spent his entire professional life in the teaching profession. So has Dr. Canterbury and myself, we are all teachers in a professional sense. Professor Clive Thomas, I would like you to speak about the teacher strike against the background of a principle that you advanced in the 1970s, and that is bread and justice. I took the liberty of attaching that that principle, and I'm saying principle because I don't want it to be a slogan, to attach it to our reading of what the workers, what the teachers, and by extension, public servants and other workers are really asking for, bread and justice. Please, if you will, put this teacher strike within the context of that bread and justice principle that you advance in the 1970s?
I would say, David, that everything that we've said so far underscored the linkage between the fight for better wages and conditions and the fight for a more just society. There can be no separation between the two. They're trying to improve their material conditions of life, but they're also trying to improve their status, their rights, their ability to have cultural expressions, their desires, their hopes, their dreams, and a just and system that allows them to transform themselves and to become better human beings as well as better citizens in Guyana. So there's no separation as far as I'm concerned. The fight for bread is really a fight for equality because much of the inequality that exists in the society is what generates the disparities that we find. So that's where the principle comes from.
Professor Clive Thomas, they weighing in on bread and justice. Of course, those of us who have been activists for a while, and my two brothers, comrades here, have been in the trenches long before me. But we grew up at a time when workers would call strikes, and the unions would then have to endorse the strike. I think they call them wildcat strikes and so
Yeah,
on. Linden was very famous for that going back to the 1960s, and we saw that tendency right up until the 1980s with the food strikes of that period. It was interesting, gentlemen, that General Secretary MacDonald on this program said that the decision to go to strike was a mandate given to them by the workers who threatened them that if they did not take industrial action, they would throw them out of the executive in some regards. This strike is driven by the workers themselves, which put to lie this whole thing that there is some agenda on the part of the union leaders to bring the government down. Dennis, your comments on that, and then over to
Yeah, but that is only so true when the workers are feeling the squeeze. Then they have no other choice but to express the fact that they're feeling the squeeze, and the union executive has nothing else to do but to support the workers because that's why they're there. So it puts the myth to the idea that they there is some kind of a political agenda or some secret plot by some others to quote unquote bring down the government because this is the direction and political strike, etc. This is what they want to argue. But they fail to realize that the workers, where you feel the squeeze, you feel the pinch. You go to the store, you go to the market, and you can't buy enough food for your children. When you go to the market and you can't bring home nutritional food for your children, then the workers would say, we can't work anymore. They call a strike. And you, the union, you have to support them because that's why they're paying their dues for you to represent them. Some people may even be critical of the union for not coming out in front to call the strike. But if the workers push you to say that you have to stay, we're going to stay out of the streets, we're going to, until we get some kind of resolution to this issue, then you have no other choice. But of course, you have to be wise and give wise leadership to these movements and not just allow them to sort of just flow and take their own course, as it were, because when that happens, then might be more injurious to the union as well as to the workers.
Dr. Dennis Canterbury, member of the WPA, weighing in here on the news that it was the teachers and it is the teachers. I think she revealed, Miss McDonald, that the suggestion was put to the teachers to get off the streets and carry on the strikes in their homes, but the teachers opted to remain on the street. Professor Clive Thomas put that in perspective for us, because you are a big proponent of the idea that human beings respond to their circumstances, and that as activists, we cannot direct the struggle. We engage in discussions and discourses of ideas, and allow those ideas to filter down in the ranks of the people in the form of consciousness. How do you see this development in 2023 of workers pushing their unions to take industrial action?
Well, that's a dialectic that has happened on many occasions in many countries. It's nothing new. To a large extent, it depends on the responsiveness of the union leadership, because they don't want to get into, or should not want to get into an antagonistic relation with their own members. And what you want is a relationship between the two that is interactive and overall, therefore, creative. They come together and they give a multiplication of the fact that they're more than two persons or two groups that are contending. They come together and give a far greater response than they could have given separately. And I think that's when the movements tend to be more and more progressive, more and more prosperous in their expectations, and more successful. It depends on that symbiotic relation between leadership and membership.
Mhm.
One
Mhm.
reinforces the other.
One reinforces the other. Professor, one of the revelations of this teacher strike, something that I think took the government by complete surprise, took the union by relative surprise, and took all of us by surprise to some degree or the other. And that is the participation of Indian Guyanese teachers in the strike. Not just their participation, but their vocalness. They've been very vocal, especially in the Essequibo and in Berbice, where you tend to have more Indian Guyanese teachers, and that they have been open. The Vice President Jack Dio crude response was that those teachers are being misled, but at the end of the day, they will vote for the PPP. And again, nothing can be more insultive to workers. Professor Clive Thomas, please comment on that interracial, multiracial response to this issue that the teachers are calling bread and butter.
Well, coming from the WPA, where we are a multiracial party and where we believe in bread and justice as the slogan of the WPA itself, I find that this is a very hopeful sign to me. I had believed over the last year or so it might be difficult to reconstitute the possibility of having struggles around common interests like improving with the living wage for workers and resisting the authority. The authority is just because they are denying the giving of that minimum wage or that living wage. I thought it might be very difficult to reinvigorate those times. But I was very happy to see that it has happened. All the photographs I've seen have been pleasing in the fact that they seem to cover a wide spectrum of Guyanese. Every photograph I've seen. Um, and it's striking that it has been happening to my mind, and as I said, in every photograph I've seen, which means it's pretty widespread across the country. Because I don't think the unions are dictating what the press photographs.
Right.
I think the press are doing their own work, and that is a sample what in fact is happening on the ground.
Yes, and we have to commend. I want to do so publicly here. The press, the media, for its coverage of the strike. Of course, I read the two independent dailies, the Kaichur News and the Stabrook News, and I think they've been doing a fantastic job of covering the strike. They're going out into the rural areas and the
Yeah.
pictures and the stories. We see Amerindian teachers in the riverine areas traveling by boat to go to central spots.
Yeah.
And the media, I think they have done a fantastic job at covering this strike and allowing us to form opinions. Yes, CY, go ahead.
I would say also someday more thoughtful and lengthy and subsidiary media like Demerara Waves and so on.
Right. Yes.
I have been reading their coverage, and that's pretty balanced and I think very insightful. They had up to this today itself, I think this morning about 9 o'clock, they put out a summary statement on where the strike was at this point in time, which I thought was excellent.
Yes, thank you. And those of us who have been saying that the traditional media is dead and social media is taking over and all of that kind of stuff, as a program that is grounded in social media or originates in social media, we also broadcast in the conventional media, and we by no means feel that the conventional media is spent. And certainly they have shown with their coverage that there is still a space for conventional reporting. Really brings to bear how dynamic our society is, and that there are changes, but there are some constants even as we change. Dennis Canterbury, your comments on the multi-ethnic face of the strike and the role of the media in covering the strike. Sorry,
Of course, I endorse what CY and yourself said on this issue, but I would like to look at the this other part of it that you mentioned about the statement from some people that the Indians might come out on strike, but then they know how to vote. I think
Jackie,
this I think this is a long and old issue. And I think I can remember reading somewhere where Dr. Jagan said that Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow was the black Cosby, because Cosby was the quote unquote colonial representative of the Indians. And so from since then, there is always this notion that Indians in Guyana need a representative. And so the PPP set itself up as the representative of Indians. So that's the origins of that statement. They're going to still vote for us because we're your representatives. But that's not true. These people are workers, like every other worker. It's a myth to say that they're all Indians. I think that if you apply this whole notion of class to this whole process, which some people don't like to do, but then you have a ruling elite. You can't say that the ruling elite, the people in Georgetown who are running the country, have the same interests as the man in the quarantine who with the cast net throwing for fish. They don't have the same interests. And so the teachers will very well come out and strike to represent their interests, because they're the ones, when they go to the supermarket or they go to the marketplace to buy, they're the ones who are feeling the pinch. So therefore, it is in their self-interest that they're out there strike, on the picket line. And so you cannot say that they're going to vote for you. It might very well be so indeed that they might do that. But I think that you can't really I think that there must be a way how to reverse that trend, because people are actually working in the self-interest.
Yes, and then people have multiple interests. They have political parties and interests. And if they see the political parties' interests wrapped up with the PPP, that's their business. But they all see their class interests wrapped up in their union. And so we have to leave space. I think that's what you're driving at, for people to express themselves based on their multiple interests. You see their class interests, their partisan interests, maybe their ethnic interests. I think this is what is so remarkable of what's happening here, is that the Indian Guyanese teachers are very clear about where their class interest is, and that is what they're giving preference to at this point in time. Come 2025, when it's time to go to the ballot, they may make another decision. But right now, I think this is the dialectic that Clive Thomas just talked about, that there are multiple interests. Yes.
Yeah, but you see, I was thinking more about as well, in addition to what you said, I was thinking about how to break this notion that they need representatives. You need a quote unquote Indian representative, somebody to represent the interests of Indians.
Well, the Indian people will make that decision. I mean, they're fully capable of making a decision who they want to represent them at the industrial level, who they want to represent them at the partisan political level, who they want to represent them at the religious level. You know, we have multiple interests, as you have been saying. The role of the media in the struggle here, coverage. Are you satisfied? Adequate coverage?
Yes, I've been looking at the same the images that they put up with the strike in the news, as well as the Kaichor news, and they seem to be fairly representative. So I haven't been able to look at the Demerara waves, you know. Dennis used to send me those things, but I don't get them now. I don't know why.
You'll have to talk to him about putting you back on the mailing list.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And yes, you're just joining us. You're on Politics 101 on a Thursday night. Of course, this is the place to be at 7 o'clock Guyana time. We're continuing our coverage of the teacher strike. It's an impasse. It's an impasse. The government has reacted. As I said on a program earlier this week, the teachers are fighting for something. The government is fighting against a lot of things. They're fighting against unionism, the right to collective bargaining. They're fighting against the teachers, asking for a fairer distribution of the resources. They're fighting against the teachers' call for a livable wage as determined by their own needs, They're fighting against the drift of the world. The world is drifting back to an emphasis on trade union representation. The PPP is fighting against that type. So they're fighting against things when the workers are fighting for things. Look at what they've done. They have deducted, they have officially sent around that MOU saying, well, not MOU, that circular saying that they have deducted from the teacher's salary, those teachers who are on strike. They've stopped deducting union dues from the teacher's salary. They have insulted the teachers. The president said words to the effect that the teachers should have a conscience, meaning that they're being unconscionable. The attack on the teachers is so rampant that one wonders whether it is our Guyana that we are looking at. The teachers have indicated that they are going to go to the court. They're going to widen the struggle, and they're going to take the government to court. Professor Clive Thomas, you have been, among other things, a trade unionist. You were once the president of the UG Workers Union. Back in the old days, it used to be the University of Guyana Staff Association. Then it became UGW. You functioned for a long time as the head of that union. You were on the executive of the Trade Union Congress. You've advised trade unions, so you are not a newbie when it comes to trade unionism. How do you see this moving forward, given what we have seen? The chief labor officer is refusing to go to conciliation and arbitration. How do you see this going forward?
I think, regrettably, the government seems to be wanting to dig in its heels and to fight to ensure it comes out a victor. And what they're trying to do is to make it a battle of attrition, where they figure they have the upper hand because they have the money and the teachers don't. So that's where I fear that they're likely to go. I thought more professional attitudes might have won out, and that a stage for a professional discussion over the payment of wages in the context of a petro state with a budget of that size and how it looks to the rest of the world. Fighting to as to whether you give $6,500 out of 1 point something trillion dollars to a teacher sounds as if it's a type of image you want to have around the world. I feel that they have given up on that type of argument, and they're more concerned with defeating politically what they see as an effort to embarrass them. I think some of it comes out of the fact that they're totally surprised at what we've been talking about at the end of the program here. The turnout, they're shocked. They probably never expected that their people would have enough of an interest in the living wage dimensions of their life to strike against them. And they were hoping to break their strike in that way. But I understand that it's uneven in some areas. I heard from some people that some of the major school institutions, particularly when I went to,
Yes.
doesn't have many people striking, which is embarrassing to me at a personal level.
Yes. Yes. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because it introduces another dimension. You go into the areas, the country areas, the East Coast, the West Coast, the Essequibo, parts of Berbice, and you see the strike there.
And you sense the vigor, yeah.
And then you come to these so-called elite schools, yes.
The petty bourgeoisie, yeah.
The petty bourgeoisie and there. Dennis, the class dimension never goes away. It's there. And we have to contend with it at every twist and turn.
Yeah. I was speaking with someone from one of those schools in Georgetown who is not on strike. And I said, why? And the person, I got the sense that there's also some level of intimidation and fear of
the petty bourgeoisie is known for fear.
Indeed, there is just that level that is playing out to some extent. But in terms of where they're going with this, I think that CY sort of assessed it in the correct way, because they want to hold out, I think, to see, because they can't, the teachers at some point, because they have to get money to take care of themselves. And if the government is going to hold back the money, then the union, if they don't have the money to pay out enough strike relief, there's going to be some problems there, right? But to show that how these people, how they perhaps the authorities are sort of prepared to hold out, as CY pointed out. They believe, well, I don't know if they believe, but at least they said, this is the vice president, attacking the teachers, claiming that they're more or less lazy, saying that 30% of them don't go to work. It's only 70% of them show up for work. And when they show up for work, they're showing up late, etc. So rather than trying to help to address the issue in an amicable way, they seem to be on the offensive, attacking. So, for example, again, we have the same person claiming that the teacher-student ratio is favorable to the teachers, and therefore they shouldn't be striking. But the workers aren't concerned. Well, the workers aren't striking because of teacher-student ratio. They're striking because they want better wages. So they seem to be, in order to push people off and to show that they're doing such good things with the last budget, and they've done so many good things for the teachers, that they're improving school buildings, they're doing all of these things, and the teachers should be grateful. But if you have a building, it's the same argument, perhaps, which might be very much supportive of the idea about taking monies from a particular place to help to pay them, or let them think about where to get the money from to do it, because people don't eat roads, or people don't eat these buildings. They need food to eat to survive, right? So in my view, I think that the future really is, as CY suggested, they're going to dig in, because these kinds of critique and insults that they're giving, meeting out to the teachers, is a clear indication that they want to dig in. There is no, and then the labor department, right? I remember in the days when we were, you could have easily gone into the labor department to get certain things done with the chief labor officer. But now, if the chief labor officer is in the pocket of the government, it would seem, then how it is that you're going to really get the chief labor officer to move in a certain direction favorable to labor? That's the problem.
Professor Dennis Canterbury here weighing in. Dr. Thomas, as we come to the end of the program, any message for the teachers from the WPA as the strike comes to the end of the second week?
Yeah, we advise them to keep up the struggle as long as they can and can afford it. And I'm sure we're willing to give them any advice or any sort of brainstorming they want to have an issue to participate in that.
Thank you very much, Professor Thomas. Thank you very much, Dennis Canterbury. Executive members of the WPA, Professor Thomas, in his own right, in his own professional capacity as an economist, a trade unionist, someone who has engaged in the struggle of ideas and practice, never separating ideas from practice and never separating practice from ideas. One of my favorite words is, of course, praxis. As a schoolboy, I first heard it from WPA people, and it's a word that, even without knowing what it meant as a schoolboy, it just sounded right to me. As I matured, I realized it was more than just a word. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for coming on to Politics 101 and lending your perspective and your expertise.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And of course, it's always a pleasure to speak with people who have been in the trenches. Dennis Canterbury is new to the program, but he's not new to struggle. He was once the treasurer of the University of Guyana Workers' Union. Professor Thomas, of course, was the president of that union, member of TUC executive. So they are well qualified to speak on this issue. As usual, we want to pay homage to you, the viewers. Without you, there is no program. We are very glad that on this program we can bring a perspective that is unique to us, to our own political culture, our own political upbringing, and our own world view. We are so happy about this strike because workers are standing up. and they're standing up for bread and justice. We are so happy about this strike because workers are prioritizing their interests. That this is not about their ethnic interests. No, this is about their class interests. This is about their class interests. And we always believe that if you allow human beings to express themselves and determine for themselves what their interests are, that they are rational people, and they would be able to make it. And I think the big news, the big surprise in this strike is, of course, the level of turnout, level of support for the strike, but also the strike resembles Guyana. That all our groups are part of it. The WPA, which has tirelessly worked for a multi-ethnic solution to our country. We are heartened by that. We are, of course, heartened by the fact that it is the workers themselves who are answering, the teachers themselves who are answering the government and say, look, you are trying to tell us that it's political, but you are making it political in the worst sense of it, in a partisan sense. And so therefore, they were hoping that that will drive a wedge in between the workers, that will drive the workers back into the classroom. Now, we are realistic. This is a war of attrition. We are going to continue to support the workers as much as we can. And we have been doing so both in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. We are very, very, very grateful that you have continued to support the teachers. When our teachers win a just wage, our children win, our communities win, our society win, our country win, and we will be better for it. Thank you all very much. And I'll see you all tomorrow night when we come back for another edition of Politics 101. We are very, very, very grateful for the support that you continue to give to us. Thank you so much.
One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we women and we children. That must be the ambition of the